Welcome to Michigan's WW1 Centennial News Report for November 2016. Michigan's Military Heritage Museum, Grass Lake, Michigan, with a special Michigan WW1 Centennial event, Combat Uniforms of the Western Front. I'm your host, Dennis Skupinski. The State Report from Grass Lake, Michigan. Michigan Military Heritage Museum opened during Veterans Day weekend.
We're really excited to bring this marvelous museum to Grass Lake, and I hope you'll come back often and see everything that we're changing. We have some exhibits that will stay long term, but we plan on having changes of exhibits every quarter or every 6 months, so that it's always going to be exciting for you to learn about stories of all of the veterans, and that is our goal, is to tell the stories of the veterans. Okay, so I'm going to see if my scissors.
Fire.
One century ago, October 1916. On October 5, 1916, Corporal Adolf Hitler was wounded in the left thigh by an artillery shell at the Battle of the Somme. October 7, 1916, Georgia Tech beat Cumberland College 222-0. This was the most lopsided college football game in history. Georgia Tech was coached by football great John Heisman. On October 8, 1916, German submarine U-53 captures and destroys 5 ships outside of Newport, Rhode Island. On October 16, 1916, activist Margaret Sanger opens the first birth control clinic in Brooklyn, New York. She was arrested on October 26 under the charges of obscenity. Also on October 16, 1916, T.E. Lawrence, a British Army officer, lands at Jeddah with the British mission from Cairo. He would be later known as Lawrence of Arabia. On October 24, 1916, the French forces reopened the offensive phase for the battle at Verdun. They recaptured Fort Douaumont. On October 26, 1916, the first German naval destroyer raid on the Dover Straits commenced. This became known as the Battle of the Dover Strait. On October 28, 1916, the British hospital ship Gallica was sunk by a mine off the French coast near Le Havre, France. On October 29, 1916, Hussein, the Sharif of Mecca, was proclaimed king of the Arab forces. On October 31, 1916, the 9th Battle of the Isonzo begins and lasts for 5 days on the Italian front. Michigan Military Heritage Museum is part of the Grass Lake Area Historical Connections. It's located at 153 North Union Street in Grass Lake, 49240. You enter the museum, the first thing you see is a guard shack with a military policeman from World War II standing there. That's to remind you and tell the story that during World War II in the Jackson County area at Waterloo, over 1,000 German prisoners of war were housed there. They worked for 80 cents a day at nearby farms. The museum has one room dedicated to early colonization of Michigan. Also, a cannon retrieved from the Detroit River after the British left Fort Detroit. The cannons were dumped in the river so that the American forces would not get them. There's another room dedicated to Grass Lake area residents who fought during the Civil War. In the World War I section of the museum, there is a trench plus a bunker which has communications equipment and other World War I items on display. There's also a captured German Maxim machine gun. The largest section of the museum is dedicated to the World War II veteran of the Grass Lake area. Many soldiers have contributed their uniforms and other memorabilia that's now on display in the World War II section at Michigan's Military Heritage Museum. The museum is fortunate enough to have several World War II veteran female uniforms. These were Grass Lake residents who fought for the United States or Canada during the war. Following the timeline of the museum, there's also Korean War, Vietnam War, and also the two Gulf Wars. They have veteran items and uniforms on display. The purpose of the museum is to tell the story of Grass Lake area veterans. If you would like to donate items, tell your story, or volunteer, please contact the museum. Combat Uniforms on the Western Front is the Michigan World War I Centennial event designed to acquaint Michigan residents with World War I combat uniforms. You can see the diversity of style and equipment used. Also, the countries that were involved. These could have been worn by the residents of Michigan. Junior officers were some of the most important positions during the First World War. They lived with the men, they ate with the men, and they fought with the men. They are the ones who were responsible for motivating their soldiers to go over the top against the enemy, and also stay and fight and not run. These were usually college or military school educated. The first is an Austro-Hungarian lieutenant of the Uhlans or Lancers. They carried a 10-foot long lance. The second is an Austro-Hungarian Jaeger lieutenant. Jaegers were usually light infantry or regular infantry. The third is an Italian mountain artillery lieutenant. Notice he's wearing mesh goggles. These protect him from rock splinters when they were fighting the Austro-Hungarians in the Alps. The next is a lieutenant of the Italian infantry from the Casale regiments. You can tell by the yellow collar tabs. He's also wearing a British respirator box, which worked a lot better than the Italian models. This is a lieutenant of the infantry for the French army. Notice the red pants. It was part of the offensive spirit of the French, the Elan. This is Captain Malcolm McCausland of the 28th Battalion, Canadian Expeditionary Force. He wears a Canadian militia uniform made in Winnipeg, November 17, 1914. He went overseas with the 28th Canadian Expeditionary Force Battalion on May 5, 1915, served as paymaster until 1916 when he was injured and sent home. He was appointed paymaster to the South Saskatchewan Rifle Regiment on October 1, 1920, and retired from the military in 1935 at the rank of major. Before the war, he was a lawyer with the law firm of Woods, McCausland, Turnbull in Regina, Saskatchewan. After the war, he worked for the Attorney General's branch of Saskatchewan government. In 1915, most of Belgium was overrun by the German army. This lieutenant from the 5th Infantry Belgian Army wears a British-made uniform with British equipment. This New Zealand lieutenant wears a standard uniform for officers of the Commonwealth armies. He wears a Sam Brown belt and is also carrying a map case. This U.S. Army lieutenant is wearing a standard uniform of the U.S. Army for officers, whether he was in the Southwest fighting Pancho Villa or attending a U.S. Army officers' training camp. During 1917 and 1918 on the Western Front, officers were prized targets for German snipers. This British lieutenant tries to blend in with a uniform that looks very much like an ordinary ranks uniform. This U.S. Army lieutenant is wearing a standard enlisted uniform, except for the gold braids around his wrist and the silver bars on his shoulders, which designate him as a first lieutenant. This is a summer weight uniform for the U.S. Public Health Department. His rank is assistant surgeon, denoted by two silver bars on his shoulders. During the war, U.S. public health personnel served in the naval hospitals in France. In the United States, they fought the Spanish influenza. They have a distinct insignia, a fouled anchor with a caduceus. The fouled anchor is a symbol that a sailor is in trouble, and the caduceus is a medical symbol for health. Ordinary ranks or enlisted personnel were the soldiers who fought on the front lines. During the First World War, the French spirit of élan or offensive was typified here in the French soldier wearing red pants, blue jacket, and a red kepi. This uniform would be worn until the middle of 1915. In 1914, when Russia entered the war, she had the largest army in Europe. This Russian soldier from the 143rd Rifle Regiment of Siberia, Nicholas II, is outfitted the way a typical Russian soldier would be fitted out. The Russians fought on the Western Front in France in April of 1916. Some parts of the Legion continued to fight even after Russia surrendered in November of 1917. 1915 German infantry soldier, part of the Royal Bavarian Army, which is symbolized by the shield on the front of the helmet and also on his belt buckle. He's wearing a pre-war light gray overcoat and has a gas mask bag on his right side. This soldier is from the 72nd Battalion, Canadian Expeditionary Force, Seaforth Highlander. Notice he's wearing a kilt and a Glengarry. Also notice a drum in front of him. It's a German drum that was captured on September 2nd, 1918 by 72nd Battalion, Company A, 4th Platoon, when they broke through the Hindenburg Line. In early May 1917, the 16th Regiment of Engineers Railway mobilized at the Michigan State Fairgrounds at 8 Mile and Woodward in Detroit. They were Detroit's only all-volunteer regiment. They were issued uniforms that were leftovers from the regular army, surplus from the Spanish, American, Indian, and Civil Wars. His left hand is holding a pre-war bayonet training rifle. The 16th Regiment of Engineers did not get their Craig Jorgensen leftover Spanish-American war rifles until June 20th, 1917. In the meantime, they used sticks or training rifles like this to practice. After the United States declared war on Germany on April 6, 1917, the United States cobbled together the 1st Division and sent them over to France in June of 1917. This is a member of the 28th Infantry Regiment, wearing the uniforms that the first American doughboys wore in France. This uniform is from the 371st Colored Infantry Regiment. Because of segregation in the U.S. Army at the time, they were assigned to the French Army. Therefore, they wore U.S. Army uniforms with French equipment. This soldier is from the Polish Army. They were heavily recruited from Chicago, Detroit, and Cleveland area in the United States, trained in Canada, and went over to France to fight. They were called Hauler's Blue Army. This is because they wore the French Horizon Blue uniform. This soldier is Azer Sheffield from Toledo, Ohio. He was part of the Quartermaster Corps, therefore he's wearing a Teamster uniform. Teamsters drove either trucks or horse carts. He is a member of Company L, 6th Ohio National Guard Infantry Regiment. He served on the Mexican border and went to France with the 37th or Buckeye National Guard Division. The last section of the collection shows what soldiers looked like on the Western Front during 1918. This is a 1918 German infantryman. After 4 years of war, Germany struggled to fill the manpower requirements it needed and also equip these soldiers. This soldier is from the 4th Battalion Canadian Expeditionary Force from Central Ontario. By 1918, the Canadians became the assault troops of the Commonwealth armies. This is a 1918 French infantryman. After the mutinies of 1917, the French army simply were in defensive mode for the rest of the war, allowing the British and the Americans to finish the war. This is a 1918 Italian infantryman. He's from the 90th Regiment of Infantry from Salerno. The Italians sent over a brigade of infantry to help the French fight. They fought in the Champagne region. This is a 1918 American infantryman on the Western Front. During the fall of 1918, the Americans had two offensives, St. Mihiel and the Meuse-Argonne. The leather gloves he wears are special finger-trigger gloves worn by Walter Maximovich. At the end of the war, the American soldiers had leave in Paris, and most of them got special custom-made uniforms, such as this one. Notice the embroidered rainbow patch which signifies the 42nd Division on the left shoulder. Also, he wears a painted helmet with the rainbow symbol on both sides and a cross of Lorraine. On Armistice Day, which was November 11th, soldiers would don their uniforms from the First World War and march down the main street of their town, celebrating the end of the war to end all wars. This soldiers from the 28th Division, 112th Infantry, Company A. In the center of the main gallery are display cases which display things such as Michigan units during the First World War, such as the 16th Regiment of Engineers. Also on display are some artifacts from the Panthéon de la Gare, which is a monumental artwork painted in Paris during the First World War, a circular panorama of 402 feet in circumference and 45 feet high. It's been described as the largest painting in the world. There's also a section dedicated to Camp Custer, which is located near Battle Creek, Michigan. It was Michigan's largest training camp during the First World War.
And from farm to answer war's alarm. There's our nation to protect the duty to be done. We've got to fight for what is right, so give each one a gun. On the land, on the sea, in the air, everywhere, till or dare. Every mother, son, a soldier with a gun upon his shoulder will be there.